Okay, so today I'm going to talk about the way we teach tech. So this is me. Well, there's a larger picture of me. This is me. I'm a software architect consultant. I usually get brought on into projects to do rescue. So the general idea is a project or a company starts, it gets bigger and bigger, grows, makes a lot of money, but the code obviously is done in startup fashion, so horrible. And then at some point, the technical debt is bigger than the actual velocity, and the dev team gets fired, and they bring me in, all right? So that's what I do. Besides that, I also own a company with a few friends. We build custom-based software for companies with a strong focus on video. So if you're interested, or your company is interested in doing anything with video, come talk to me. I'm also a developer, very poor one. I also organize DDDNL. I also like to, build stuff sometimes, and if you want, you can find me on Twitter. Besides that, we are hiring, but who isn't, so I'm not going to bore you with that. So today, I want to talk about anime. So nowhere in my abstract was PHP mentioned, so we're not going to talk about PHP, we're going to talk about anime. Who here watches anime? Quite a few. Okay. So I'm going to talk about, anime is the Japanese, translation of animation. So anything in Japan that is animated is called anime. But in the West or in the rest of the world, anime is specific to this genre of animation. So online comics or not comics, like, these kinds of stuff. Anime has like a zillion genres. Every Hollywood genre you can think of, there's an anime of that. But I'm going to focus on one specific genre, which is shonen. So this is our kanji for shonen, and basically kanji means boy or youth, right? And this kanji means cartoon or comic. So youth comic, boy comic, right? So comics made for boys. The target audience is 14 to 18, but the rest of the world watches them, from 10 to 50 or older. They don't discriminate against age. So usually shonen or these kinds of comics are coming of age stories. So usually it starts out with a young guy or a young protagonist that grows up, has to overcome some obstacles, usually fight his way through pain, and has to grow and grow, become stronger and stronger until he comes up against an ultimate force or an ultimate end boss and has to defeat him, and usually he wins because else it would be a sucky story, right? In the West, we don't really know this type of arc or this type of stories. The closest I could find was Karate Kid, which is mostly a testament to how old I am, because how many of you have actually watched this? Holy moly.
You're not that old.
So either I'm not old or you're all old. You choose. Don't watch the remake.
You watched the original film.
Yes, in black and white. So, so some of the more popular shonen anime is Dragon Ball Z. Who heard of seen Dragon Ball Z? Okay, good. Else it would have been a very short talk. Next, very popular Naruto, One Piece, and lately Boku no Hero Academia. Yeah, so they're all the same genre, the same kind of story. So I say it's boys comics, but it's not specifically targeted. Well, it's targeted as boys, but it's not only for boys. And the protagonist is not always a boy. Sometimes it's a girl. In this case, Tora Kagura no Railgun, or translated a certain specific type of scientific railgun. And it's about the main protagonist called Misako Mikoto, who has the power, the electric power, to charge something and then release that power. And one of the cool things about being a speaker is that I get to show you this. And you just have to watch it. How awesome is that? How many of you would want to fire a railgun? Okay, never mind. So what's key in these types of stories is that a main protagonist grows over time, right? So if, for instance, the story begins and the protagonist would fight the end boss immediately, he would have a bad time. Would make for a very short anime, probably one episode, and this would be, pretty well known who would win. So they don't do that. You grow, just like, in video games, you get to fight stronger and stronger opponents until you, defeat the end boss. So that's the first thing. The second thing, they never do it alone. There's always, if you saw the pictures before, there's always a group supporting the main protagonist, right? So it's not like he's some lonely guy somewhere in the middle of nowhere training, and then suddenly he's like a superhero. Well, there's one that's called One Punch Man, but that's a different story. So a lot of training, a lot of practice, a lot of sweats and tears, until they finally, what we call level up. He becomes better at something, and you get new skills, etc., etc. By the way, who knows this comic? So this is Scott Pilgrim. It's kind of shonen, so it kind of is the same as the Japanese style, written by Brian Lee O'Malley. If you like this stuff, strongly recommend. So this is basically how they grow, right? So they start out small, then come better, 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 better. Then their hair changes, and now they're like have superpowers. I don't know why, but I mean that's a rule apparently. So this is kind of similar how we teach martial art. We don't teach martial art like this, right? That would be very stupid. Instead, we teach martial art like this. So you begin young. You have to do one specific exercise all the time. We call them kata. And until you master them, then you learn a new one, right? And then you master that until you grow and grow and grow. And instead of your hair color, you know, your band changes until you get black, and then you're on your own. And what you do then is you go to a mountain and try to find some old white guy, and then he teaches you like the super stuff, because apparently that's where they are. So, and after he teaches you all the stuff he knows, you become like enlightened, and then you're like godlike. Then you're like this, right? So how do we teach tech in IT? So when we teach tech in IT, we say, well, we need to draw an owl. So you have two circles, and then you draw the owl. So this is how we teach tech. Anyone who has ever done a TDD course or anything remotely like iteratively, that's usually, hey, this is A plus B, so you put in 1 and then 2, and then you assert that it's 3, and wow, now you know TDD, now you have this like dependency graph, go test that. Good luck, right? Okay. Next thing is, all these characters have specific powers, right? They are not all the same. They have like specific, you know, this is Gohan from Dragon Ball Z. He is good at some things and he's bad at the other things. Nappa is good at some things and he's bad at the other things. And is it Gohan? Goku, sorry. So, and this is Goku, and he's basically good at everything. So all these different types of characters have specific, you know, things they're good at. And you know, they use that. That's what they use during their battles. But in tech, it's more like this. So for fair selection, everyone has to take the same exam. Please climb that tree. This is how we usually do it, right? And obviously, the goldfish wins. So not only that, if you start out now in tech, there's so much you need to learn. It's ridiculous. So for instance, you need to learn a language. So PHP, Ruby, Python, Java. You need to learn Git. You need to learn HTML. You need to learn CSS. You need to learn JavaScript, some JavaScript framework. And not even talking about deployment process, build pipelines, you know, JavaScript pipelines, or any like minimizing CSS and all that stuff. Or, I mean, God forbid, blockchain. Right? So starting right now in tech basically feels like this. Everything is on fire. You're this one guy, and there's a giant titan, which is, you know, the problem. That's also on fire. Stares you straight in the eyes, and you know your product owner, project manager is like, well, good luck. You have 2 days, right? So how many of you had a formal IT education? About 1/3. So this is very typical for the PHP industry, right? Most of you are either self-taught or started out with something IT-ish and then switched over to PHP. By the way, this is more because of the memes. So most of us started, you know, teaching themselves. And usually we started like this, right? We wrote some HTML, and then we did like this PHP echo hello world, and then we pressed F5 in our browser, and holy shit, we saw echo world, right? So now we felt like a god. We were like the best of the best. We were lead hackers and everything, right? We were like, oh, this is awesome. Until we encountered this, right? And then we felt like this. And you question your life, and you question your life decisions, and you're like, why do they ever start? And so, but as most programmers do, when we come into like something situation, we were like, okay, well, let's try something new, right? So the way most of us learn the best is by this, by making small little steps, small iterations until we finally solve a problem. This is how most humans learn the best. So what about if we have questions, right? So what about them? Well, we can ask our colleagues, but they might think we're stupid, or they might think less of us, or they're busy, or whatever reason. Usually we don't go to our colleagues immediately if we encounter a problem. And the same goes for Slack. Slack is nice for offline communication or async communication. But if you want a direct answer as to why your problem doesn't work, or why you have a problem, why it doesn't work, Slack is usually not the first place you go to. Because we all go here, right? This is the first place, our base. So Stack Overflow. Is there anyone here who doesn't know Stack Overflow? Is there anyone sane here that doesn't know about Stack Overflow? Okay. So is Stack Overflow the best we have in our industry? So I went on Stack Overflow, saw this post. It's a question about how to add a number to another number in JavaScript. And I'll make it a little better for you. So add a number to another number in JavaScript. Hallo. That's the Dutch saying, hallo. So it's very nice to start out, saying with a greeting. I have got a number in my JavaScript variable. Now how do I add another number to it? Please. Also very nice, right? We don't do a lot of pleases and hellos in questions anymore. It's like, give me the answer. Anyway, so he was on Stack Overflow. And obviously, the correct answer was, to add numbers together, you should use the plus operator. For example, var a is 1, var b is a plus 2, alert b equals 3. Obviously, this was the wrong answer because it got downvoted, right? The correct answer should have been, you should definitely use jQuery. It's really great and does all things. Then someone else says, I agree. jQuery is really the best. It solves all kinds of browser problems and is good as well. Always nice. And then the third one is like, +1 jQuery is best quality code ever. If you don't use it, you're an idiot. Keep in mind, this is not me photoshopping. This is the actual, you can look it up. This is the actual answer, right? Okay, so and then there's another answer, that other guy who goes, well, I think there's a jQuery plugin for that. Google for jQuery, basic arithmetic, so he recognized this is basic arithmetic, but decided that you need a plugin anyway, right? So yeah, the next one to that is, yeah, jQuery is definitely the way to go. And then the third one goes, I used a jQuery diet plugin and lost 10 kilograms in a week. True story, written by Jay Fatty. So is Stack Overflow our best resource we have?
Yes, absolutely. It's not the best, but it's the one we have.
It's the one we deserve, right? Yeah. So the problem with it is, especially if you're just starting out, is usually you don't want these extra stuff, like jQuery is useful in its own right, but usually when you just start out and you're not familiar with all these, things, you just want a straight answer. You just want to solve your problem. If you just want hello world and it doesn't work because you missed a, semicolon, you just want to hear, hey, you're missing a semicolon, and not like, hey, you should use jQuery. So if you have a problem like this, so obviously this is Pythagoras, basic arithmetic. If you just start out, you just want to say, hey, this is x. Right? This is the answer you're looking for. Not like, hey, you should do Pythagoras, like a plus b squared, etc. Okay. So after the, the startup phase, the junior phase, you come into what I call the meteor phase, where you see like diagrams, UMLs everywhere. You're like, oh, I need arrows, and I need boxes, and I need decision trees, etc., right? So it's mostly about, hey, which paradigm can I implement? Can I use a strategy pattern here because that sounds cool, or should I use whatever else, right? And then when you grow even further, you really don't care about that anymore. As a senior in general, you just want options. So there's a solution for the problem somewhere. I mean, you're probably not the first one who ever encountered this problem. You just want to know what's the trade-off. So if I go to the left, does it make me do a roundabout at 100 kilometers and have to go back? If I go to the right, is there a bridge that's closed? Stuff like that, right? You just want options. So I call these the stages of problem solving. So the first stage is, I just want to solve my problem, the x, right? I just want to know where x is. The second one is I want to understand my problem. So about Pythagoras, you want to understand why that works, right? And the first one is, I want to be pointed into the right direction and given options. So you know there's a solution for it, just give me options, right? So I would argue that the context matters. The context in which you talk to each other, either meteor to junior, junior to senior, senior to meteor, it really matters what kind of information you're looking for. So, and what solutions you should give them. And this is very much dependent, right? So the context is very important. And the context is very dependent on a bunch of factors. For instance, knowledge. How much do I know about this subject? Do I know Pythagoras? Have I solved this problem before? Or have I solved a similar problem before, which is experience? How much time do I have? Is this a hobby project? Am I just hacking at the side? Or is this a deadline? Do we need to solve this problem now? Because that changes the way you solve problems as well. How much pressure is there on this? Is this like, if we don't solve this, we're going to lose a lot of money? Or yeah, some PO says it should be done and it's the end of sprint, but I don't care for it, so whatever. And also, this is a fault most developers have. How interesting do we find the problem? I've seen many people go a deep dive into an issue because they thought it was an interesting problem where the solution was actually 2 lines of code, but they knew that, but they wanted, let's see if I can get the better version, right? The, reusable one. So with all that information, I come to this very scientific diagram. I took a sample size of 1,000 problems I could think, and no, I did not, I just made this up. So if you have no knowledge, you just want to solve a problem, right? If you have some knowledge, you want to understand the problem. And if you're very knowledgeable, you just want options. This is the matrix I start using. So that sounds all fine, but what does it actually mean, right? So imagine we're just starting out. We don't know anything. We know a little bit about PHP, but not a lot, right? So we're a junior. And we have this class. The class has a method that says do something. But sometimes, whenever it does something, it breaks, right? So we decided, hey, that's kind of bad. I want to log that. I want to write that somewhere so I can see when it goes wrong. So I want to log errors by John Doe, our junior developer. Right? Well, John Doe goes to her colleague, Sansa Stark, and says, well, I have this problem, I want to log something, and Sansa goes, this is awesome, I have all these kinds of, have you thought about elk stack? Do you want to use syslog? Do you want to use Splunk? Or do you want to use Kafka for your logging? And the junior is like, So it goes back, does some Googling, learns about eventual consistency in Kafka, learns about that Splunk is very enterprisey, thinks syslog is very confusing, and eventually is like, I have no idea what I should do, right? All these options are not bad options. It's just that the context where you give this information is wrong, right? You just want to write a log. So this is miscommunication, right? 2 people talking past each other instead of with each other. And I see this a lot happening in business, at meetups, at conferences, where the context is not strongly divided. So a senior developer talking about some abstract problem where a junior developer is, can't you just, do write file or something like that, right? So tip, usually when you want to talk to someone about this, ask the context they're asking it in. And if you're working with someone, make sure to use the make it work, make it good, make it fast approach, right? So first make it work, regardless of what the problem is. So we have this method, do a thing that sometimes fails, and we're like, okay, when it goes wrong, we want to catch that, right? And now since PHP 7, we can just have some interface trouble and we can catch anyone or anything. And we just write a file, right? A log file. So we have my log, we write it to the log file. And we want to know why it went wrong, so we log the message. And we don't want it all in one line, so we add a new break line. And then we append to the file because else we just have the latest or the last message, which is kind of stupid, all right? So that is. So how many of you have ever written code like this? So anyone who has his hands down, you're a liar, because this is what everyone does. So this works, right? So our junior puts in the PR and says, well, I've solved the problem. And then we have our code reviewer, Alice. And Alice says, well, what if we want to change the location of where we want to log to, right? Now this is a very important step. This is code review. How many of you do code review? Good. because a few years ago there was like a few hands. Now there's a lot of hands, so I'm very glad of that. So code review is a very good place to teach and to learn. Code review, a senior can ask a junior, what if, right? So don't say someone is wrong or it's not the right solution, whatever. Just ask, what if? So what if we want to change the location? And the reason for this is you want someone to figure out what's not perfect on the code by himself. You don't want to tell him, because that's not learning, right? Telling them, like, this is the solution, you won't learn anything from that. But if you say, well, what if this happens? And he's like, huh, that's interesting, I never thought of that. Well, maybe I should, redo something and think about it again. And the other part of it is if you have a junior who code reviews a senior, right? I know this is mind-boggling, but he can ask why. Why are you doing it like this? So a tip for me is, or from me is, whenever you add or have a code reviewer, always add a junior, because they can ask why. Why is it like this? And sometimes that's annoying because there's a lot of assumption why certain things are the way they are. But also sometimes you can question the establishment, like why are we doing it like this? And usually it's some bullshit like, well, we've always done it like this, right? But everyone forgot why. And then you're like, well, maybe we don't have to do that anymore, right? So tip, always make a junior part of your code review process. So our junior developer goes back to the drawing board, and he heard about this awesome new feature what everybody's using, environment variables. So he's like, okay, if we have an environment variable, we can now, define a random path we want to log the file to, and we're done, right? So again, PR analysis, well, much better. So this is positive reinforcement, right? So not say, well, this wasn't what I meant. Just say, this is better, because it is better than the previous version, right? We learn by positive reinforcement. Because else people are going to feel, I'm not doing a good job. I'm going to feel bad. I'm going to leave the company. That's not what you want. So this is a nice time to explain why global variables are a bad thing. Now, I'm not going to explain that. If you want to know why that's a bad thing, or Frank or someone, I don't know. So this is not this is a good opportunity to explain why this is wrong. And this is a good opportunity to introduce something like the inversion of control and why that's a good thing. So instead of relying on global state, we rely on an inversion of control. So instead of saying, well, somewhere in the world I can grab this arbitrarily, we're going to say, well, you're probably going to need this, so we're just giving it to you, right? So dependency injection or inversion of control, there are very many options to that. This is, I think, the most well-known. So structure injection. Anyway, doesn't matter. So, better, right? So we'll go back again, and Alice goes, well, what if you want to log to something else than file, right? Junior's like, wait, we can do that? Awesome. So this is where we can explain, right? Well, there's, you want the thing you log to, you want to have like some abstract notion of that. You want to have some thing, and we don't really care what the thing is, right? So this is a good way to introduce interfaces, why they're useful. So we make an interface logger. We have a public function log with some kind of message. And we can make a file logger. And basically, we just copy paste all the code into a new class. And then we just inject that logger, and we're done. Now, if we ever want to have a Redis logger or database logger, we can just make that, add the implementation, and we're done, right? Now, most of you will now start thinking, well, did you know there was a standard for that? Why would you make it yourself, right? So the point here is not that there's a standard for that. The point here is that you don't want to go from A to Z. You want to go from A to B to C to D to E in small iterations. Because now the junior understands why there's a standard. This is a standard problem, and we need a standard solution for this, right? So there is. So this is a good time to talk about PSR and what it can bring us and why it's useful, right? So we need to change the logger to error because it doesn't have a log method, but that's it. So we go back to Alice, and she's like, well, you do realize that logging an error is not actually the responsibility of the class, right? The only responsibility the class has is to do a thing. So it's kind of weird that we have all this logger stuff in there, which is only used when something goes wrong. It's not actually part of the responsibility, right? So, do you know about decorators, right? And we can decorate this method with a logger, logger interface, so we can still use it, but have it, somewhere else, right? So we make an interface do something, so it does something. We make a loggable example, and we inject our example, and we inject a logger interface, and we just wrap the call, right? And now our original code basically looks the same. It just implements a do something method. Right. So just from this code review, a simple code review with a very dumb example, we explained why global state is a bad thing, why dependency injection is a good thing, why interfaces are good, why single responsibility is good, and why decorators are sometimes useful, right? So do we know of other opportunities, learning, teaching opportunities within our normal flow of work, right? So this is not something new. Code reviews, most of you raised your hands, you're already doing that, right? So the first, obvious thing is books. Everybody, likes books, I hope. So books are very good, but they're not interactive, right? So there's no feedback loop. It's just you reading it, and then hopefully you understand it. So if you want to read good books, I strongly recommend this site, DevBooks. It lists all the most, how do I say this, mentioned books on Stack Overflow. So whenever someone says, hey, I need a good book for something, then this is what. So the #1 mentioned book on Stack Overflow is Working Effectively with Legacy Code. And then, with a very large margin, #2 is design patterns, the principles, object-oriented design. But anyway, I'll leave you with that bit. So the next step you can do is online courses. But again, this is, self-taught. This is not interactive. This is just you doing exercises, right? Where the whole point would be that you teach something to someone, or you learn something from someone else, right? So one of the better things for this is pair programming. And pair programming is not only, used as a tool or a mechanism to do program, but it's also an enormously well done teaching mechanism. Because when a senior is the programmer, like the, what do you call it again? Sorry? Driver, yeah. Your job as a senior is to shut up, literally, and listen and make the junior tell its entire thinking process. Why is it doing this? Why is it thinking about that? Why is it choosing this option? So don't correct anyone, just listen, right? And then when it's your turn as a senior, start not correcting, but start saying, well, maybe if we think about it like this, and then tell them what that would solve, right? So instead of saying you're doing it wrong, you're just showing them there might be a better way. The other way around, the junior can sit there and look at your code and think, hey, but why are you doing it like this, right? Again, the same principle, a good time to explain why it's that way. So a pair programming session could be very strongly used as a teaching mechanism, and I would strongly advise you to do that. Next one is Meetups. So I don't know how many of you go to Meetups or tech-related Meetups. 2 hands? Okay, a few more. Okay, great. So what usually happens at Meetups is that people either talk to the persons they know or just the people they went with, right? I would say this is a very lost moment. What you can do at Meetups is just talk to people around you and ask them about things. Make sure that you know what the context is. If you're talking to someone who thinks he's junior, senior, media, or whatever, at least you know that you have a base ground. But you can learn a lot from those people. And what usually happens is people stand in circles or stand in circles, which is very hard to get into. So I was recommended by Dennis, who's sitting here, the Pac-Man Rule, which means is whenever you're at a meetup or a conference and you're talking to a bunch of people, don't make a closed circle. Always make room for one more person. So whenever anyone walks by and listens in and hears something he's interested in, or finds interesting, or has something to add to, he can just walk into the circle. Because a closed circle for humans is a very barrier to get into that conversation, right? And it's not that hard. You just make a little. That's it. So another form of teaching is event storming. Event storming is sometimes used for deliberate learning, right? So deliberate learning. We take the time to learn, basically. Hopefully paid by the boss. So event storming is a way to map out a process that has a timeline to it with a bunch of stickies. It's usually used for exploratory, so finding stuff out. How does it work? Can we map it? It's a great way to get developers talking to business people, because usually you need both in an event storming session. But it's also a great way to do knowledge sharing, because if you add someone, either from another team, or someone that's new to the project, or maybe someone from a different department, they learn how the process actually works, right? So obviously conferences. Conferences are a great way to learn. For one, look around you with a bunch of people who are here to learn, hopefully not just sent by their boss and have to be here, but most of you want to learn something. So conference is a great way to just, especially if you are in a talk together, look around you and just ask them, what did you think about the talk, right? And then please don't get tortures and pitch and attack me, because that would be bad. Okay. Another one is, being a speaker. Being a speaker is also a very interesting way of teaching and learning. For one, you have to do a lot of research for your talk, so you learn a lot from that. And two, people are going to ask questions you didn't think about, so that's a good way to learn. Oops. So we're in the Netherlands, and there's a very unique opportunity within the Netherlands to learn something. It's called WeCamp. It's what we call a code retreat. It's basically where you get put on an island for a week and make a project. Now, if that sounds a little bit like the Hunger Games to you, you're not completely wrong. I mean, you're completely safe. No, so I make fun of it a lot, but it's really a very powerful tool. So you're dropped on an island with a bunch of people. You form teams, and you make something, a product, a SaaS, something, anything, right? And obviously, it's about the journey, not the destination. But because you do everything from start to finish, not just the code, but the planning, the thinking of an idea, thinking of a solution, etc., with people you don't know, you learn so much valuable social skills just from being there. And I've seen so many people make enormous leaps just being there for a few days and then figuring out, hey, I've been doing it, I wouldn't say wrong, but there's a simpler way to do certain things, right? So I would strongly recommend you check that out. So another great way to do teaching is small controlled experiments. So who here heard of small controlled experiments? A few. So the term was coined by Matthias Verhaas, and it basically means that within a team, sometime during a sprint, assuming you're using something like Scrum, but sometime during a sprint, you do something where we vote on. So anyone can bring up an idea. So, for instance, I don't know. So this is one thing I heard. In a company, I know usually let's go back. So usually during Scrum, you have a stand-up in the morning, right? So where everybody tells them, hey, what is blocking me? What have I done? And what am I going to do, right? Very normal for the day start. The thing is, at this company, everyone had kids, and they needed to be brought to school. So everyone got in late. They missed either the stand-up, or they moved the stand-up to a later point. The thing is, though, there were also people who were coming in early, and they were like, I need this information. I want to know what I have to do. So one of the small controlled experiments they did, just for a sprint, is that, someone said, what if we do the stand-ups at the end of the day? Sounds simple, sounds reasonable. So they tried it for a sprint, and everybody was on board on it. It solved all the problems because people could walk in later to bring away the kids. And everybody already knew from the previous day what they were going to do this day, right? So you didn't have to do the stand-up in the morning. So this small thing turned out to be very efficient, turned out to be very good for the process. And you can do this with a lot of things. Like if you see something that's like, maybe we should try doing this, and you just do it for a sprint, and then you vote on it. So how many of you like it, how many of you hate it, et cetera, et cetera. And if you like it, you do it more. If you hate it, you don't do it anymore. That's it. It's not, super science. So, but be aware of absolutes, right? When you're in the teaching business, always be aware of absolutes. We think as programs in general, very binary. So either left or right or wrong, good or bad, PHP or Ruby, you know, these kinds of thoughts. So how many of you have read this book? Okay, a few. So there's a lot of patterns in here that get used daily. A lot of frameworks use the patterns in here, et cetera, et cetera. So just because the patterns exist, don't mean you have to use them all the time. Sometimes it's easier to not use them. Sometimes it's better to not use them. Don't get stuck in the train of thought that like someone wrote this down, so therefore I have to use it, right? It's there to make your life easier, not to force you into a paradigm, right? So take this into account whenever you're teaching something. Don't say this is the way to do it. This is a way to do it. Because software is like a sinus. Every few years we reinvent ourselves, right? So when I was starting out with software, everything was like, we need one big application. The monolith was the best thing you could build. Nowadays it's like we need like everything but the monolith. Some, you know, tiny, you know, services, whatever, in clouds, with blockchain, whatever. So in a few years it's going to be, I mean, that's all too complicated. All the extra communication lines is, you know, nobody can understand it anymore. Let's just go back to doing everything in one, you know, one box. And you'll see this a lot. Like, we reinvent new stuff. Event sourcing is now very popular. I mean, it's not new. Event sourcing has been around since 1960, 1950. Even before that, if you don't count, you know, the electrical age. So every few years we reinvent ourselves, and then this is the best new thing. And then a few years later, everyone's like, why did they ever use that, right? So don't get stuck in absolutes. And this is because we always think too highly of ourselves. So this is a very scientific diagram we drew. So the orange line is how much we think we know, right? The blue line on the bottom is how much we actually know. And the green line is the amount of stuff we realize we actually need to know. So yeah, anyone who disagrees with this diagram? I mean, you can. It's just my opinion. And don't think that becoming a senior is a linear process, right? It's usually more like this. People are good at some things, bad at other things. People have natural feeling for some problems. Some things they can never, ever understand. Serverless, no idea. So why am I telling all this? Why do I find this important, right? So there's a quote by Robin Martin, which goes like this. The number of programmers doubles every 5 years. That means at any time, half the world's programmers have less than 5-year experience. So whenever you're in a position of hiring and you say, well, I can't find any seniors. Where are all the seniors? Why can't we get any seniors? That's because they're not there. They're flooded with juniors every 5 years. So the amount of juniors grows exponentially to the amount of seniors we have, right? So what can we do about that? Well, we can teach our own juniors to become meteors, seniors, whatever, right? So create your own. Just don't go looking for them because they're not there. I tried. So, coming back to it, the way we should teach tech. People learn best one step at a time, so iteratively. Agile proves that iterative working is what fits humans best. Find opportunities to learn or teach, but find it within your standard paradigm, within your standard process, within your standard development process, right? Find mentors, mentees. Find a guy on the mountain who laughs at you and makes fun of you, but actually knows what he's talking about and can teach you a lot, right? Create your own seniors, because else you won't have any. And never stop learning. And if we do that, everything's going to be A-okay. Oh, hey. Okay. Ah, there we go. So, before I leave you, I just want to add this one little thing. Me and a friend of mine recognized that books are a very good way to learn, but you miss the feedback loop, you miss the interaction, it's very, you know, inwards, not outwards. So we're starting a club, the Pagination Club. I've got my, you know, hipster hat for the club domain. which is basically an online book club where you can read books, technical books specifically, with a bunch of people and then discuss the content of it, so you're not reading it alone. The two advantages: one, usually happens if you have a book, you read it like for 2 chapters, and you put it on your night dresser and you never read it again. And then two, you actually can discuss stuff with other people, your peers. So if you don't understand something, maybe someone else did, or maybe someone learned something completely different from it. We're not live yet because it's way harder than we thought. We thought, oh, it's going to be easy. It's not. So for now, you can just sign up for a newsletter where we send you if it's ever going to be finished, hopefully sometime next month. And thank you for listening. I would really appreciate some feedback. This is my join-in, and that was it. That was my talk.